take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
In the hit movie, The Matrix, humanity was happily existing in a fake reality, oblivious to the fact that everything they did was without substance or meaning. They were observing what they wanted to. It wasn't until Morpheus offered them a red pill that the illusion was shattered and they awoke cold and confused in the real world. Some people were so rattled by reality that they yearned to return back to the comfort of the Matrix. In the reloading world, some people are currently offering us a red pill, daring us to cast aside everything we know about reloading and accept that our load development process isn't really doing anything. In this video, I'll discuss the reloading process that we've been using for generations. Then we'll take a look at a controversial new reloading theory that's spreading like a wildfire in the reloading community. After we prepare our brass, reloaders for the last 100 years have gone right into looking for the right powder charge for their load. Many years ago, people would simply shoot groups at different charge weights and look for the best groups that didn't show any pressure signs. Then, a man named Creighton Audet invented what we know as the ladder test today. Audet found out that everything else being a constant, powder charges exist that bring a rifle barrel into harmonic balance and achieve the most stable results on target. Many top shooters still use that same ladder test today. These points of so-called harmonic balance that Audet found were initially referred to as sweet spots, but today we call them nodes. Then Dan Newberry took it a step further with his famous OCW test. The OCW test does the same thing as the ladder test, but it lets you visually observe groups. The problem with the OCW test is that it relies on the shooter to be an excellent shot, and unfortunately, most people aren't. People using the OCW test need to be great shooters with top-tier rifles. In the late 1990s, Dave Brennan began comparing ladder test results with his velocity charts. What he found was that within those sweet spots on the ladder test, the actual velocity of his rounds would settle kind of into a stable velocity node. And this method, though, never really took off initially because nobody really trusted optical chronographs in those days. Yeah, the Oler 35 was the first commercially available chronograph that people actually trusted, but an Oler was very hard to get, it was expensive, and it needed the right environmental conditions for accuracy. I know my old Oler 35P could be really temperamental on some days out at the range. Then, in 2012, the MagnetoSpeed chronograph came out, and this thing is very cheap, easy to set up, and it was more accurate than most optical chronos. And, it wasn't sensitive to environmental conditions. Then, in 2015, the lab radar hit the scene, and we finally had a portable, highly accurate Doppler radar for your average reloader to use. Then of course, it's progressed today. We have these little units like the Garmin that basically exceeds the performance of the lab radar in just a tiny package. So chronographs have come a long way. And when people had access to these more accurate chronographs and readily available chronographs, guys like Scott Satterlee began finding powder nodes based solely on chronograph data. But many of us found Satterlee's one shot per charge weight sample size to be way too small, and his results often could almost never be repeated. So most of us modified the Scott Satterlee method to include 5 shots per charge weight to get better data. And, then we chart out our data like Dave Brennan did back in the 1990s, and we were happy. Today, the ladder test, the OCW test, and the modified Satterley velocity test are all popular methods of finding a powder node. Most hunters and recreational shooters use velocity tests with a good chronograph because it completely removes human error from the equation during load development. But in contrast to that, most long-range competition shooters use some form of OCW or ladder test because they want to see what their loads are physically doing at targets out at a long range. But all three methods of finding a powder node or velocity node take different paths to achieve the same thing. Finding that perfect powder charge that optimizes the harmonics of the barrel is the foundation of modern reloading. The second step in most reloading processes is to fine-tune our loads with seating depth. Most shooters believe that seating depth has an effect on precision, and much of my data indicates that it does. We usually start with an overall length that's kind of close to the lands and work our way away from the lands while shooting 5-shot groups. When we find a spot where the groupings are good, we call that our accuracy node, and we load ammo to that spec to test at distances. What I found is that many commercial rifles with sloppy chamber tolerances are very sensitive to bullet jump. Many of the rifles with high quality custom barrels on them are much less sensitive to bullet jump. Some shooters with really great barrels who consistently use the same bullet don't really worry about seating depth. They'll just jump the bullet at a predetermined amount that they've already verified through experience works in their rifle, and they'll just go ahead and find a powder node and call it done. Most of your champion competition shooters, precision shooting legend, and most recreational shooters use a load development process that resembles what I described in the previous chapters of this video. Finding the right powder charge and seating depth is the core of modern reloading. But now, a Hornady engineer and ballistician are claiming that the results of our reloading processes are just an illusion. That we're basing our load data on statistically insignificant samples. They've gone as far as claiming that charge weights don't even matter for precision. Hornady's senior ballistician and head engineer really got the ball rolling on this concept, but they likely borrowed the idea from Brian Litz, who did a podcast on the exact same thing about 3 months before Hornady did it. Basically, they claim that our observations with current load development aren't real, that the sample sizes we're using are just too small, and that what you're seeing with your powder nodes and SDs is pure luck and randomness. They tell us that powder node tests are rarely repeatable, and they want us to leave the matrix and master this new reality that they've created. The Hornady guys shot mini groups consisting of high shot counts, and they got what they considered to be statistically significant results. They found that most 5 and even 10 shot groups that we normally do are pretty much worthless for data points. It's not until you fire 20 round groups when a reliable picture of load precision and standard deviation can be realized. Outdoor Life, which, admittedly does kind of shill for Hornady, decided to test this theory. So they did a typical powder charge test, then loaded rounds with the best load of the test and the worst load in multiple rifles. After shooting both loads, they concluded that precision was actually statistically the same. They claim that the best thing you can do is to load powder to find a safe velocity that you want, then start shooting a 20 round group. If that group starts to kind of go all over the place, stop what you're doing, because your gun doesn't like the powder or the bullet that you're using, and it's time to start all over again with the new powder or bullet. In essence, they claim that a barrel doesn't care much about charge weight or cartridge overall length, and only the powder, primer, and bullet combination matters. They go even further than this by claiming that they tested different forms of brass preparation as well, and they claim that sorting brass, deburring flash holes, and turning necks also has no statistical improvement when using high quality brass. Basically, the engineer and ballistician at Hornady claim that 90% of our current load development processes are meaningless, and all we're doing is chasing results from poor sample sizes. So what bothered me about this initially is that I work with engineers all the time, and with their tendency for complexity bias and paralysis by analysis, engineers are often wrong. And I've learned to second guess them a lot in my career. Engineers are necessary, but you can never put them in charge of anything. Secondly, I don't really trust Hornady. Hornady has a history of making outrageous claims, and frankly, they're partially responsible for the unethical trend of long distance hunting, which they still promote. So I'll do a powder node test myself using only velocity, and I'll load up 20 from the best node and 20 rounds from the worst, and let's see what happens. The rifle I'm using for this test has a Stiller action with a Brux barrel bedded into a Manners stock. I threw on a Leupold VX6 hunting scope for this test, and this rifle, in my mind, represents kind of the limits of what I'd call a hunting rifle. It's not a competition rifle, but it's definitely not something like a mountain rifle either. This rifle shoots matched bullets into tiny groups with a target scope with a thin reticle. But for this test, I'll be using a hunting bullet, the 127 grain Barnes LRX. I'll go ahead and jump these bullets 50 thousandths like Barnes recommends. I'll also be using H4350 for this test, which this barrel really likes. I'll load up powder in 2/10 increments between 41 and 43 grains, and I'll look for a powder node. So let's get started on load development. So I did some load development, and I ran my typical powder node test using velocity. And that's usually how I find my powder nodes. Each powder charge tested was 5 shots each, and velocity was recorded using my Garmin chronograph. You could see what I'd call a powder node at 42.4 grains right here. And normally, that's the node I'd pick during a test like this. And you could see, that's the group it shot right there. And then after I pick this node right here, normally, I'd move on to seating depth testing to fine-tune this load. But we're not going to bother with seating depth in this test because we don't want to introduce another variable. I'm going to load 20 rounds at this powder node of 42.4 grains. Then I'm going to load 20 more rounds with 41.4 grains of powder, which according to this chart should be in a bad area, or what we call an anti-node. Then I'm going to shoot each batch into big ass groups and see what happens. Even though the barrel on the rifle doesn't really experience point of impact shifts when it's warm, I'm going to let my barrel cool between shots using a barrel cooler, and this is solely to remove another perceived variable. I'm going to monitor the velocity of each shot as well and measure the size of each group, and then I'll make a comparison based off of that data. I'm also going to be shooting round robin style, basically alternating loads and targets to make this test fair. So off to the range I go. So these are my two 20-round groups. And of course, that was the powder node I found, 42.4 grains of H4350. And this was kind of my anti-node, 41.4 grains of H4350. And I really took my time at the range. I fired 43 rounds, 3 Fowlers, and then started doing round robin on these groups right here. And every shot except this one felt good. Remarkably, out of 43 shots fired, I think that was the only one that didn't feel great to me. But I counted it in the group anyways, to be fair. But just a full disclosure here, every shot except for that one felt good to me. But let's go ahead and analyze these groups. The extreme spread was 16 for my best powder node, which is great, and 44 for my worst powder node. My group size for my best powder node was just over an inch, about an inch and an eighth. And my group size for the anti-node for 20 shots was just over an inch and a half. So statistically, my best node had a group that was about, 35% smaller than the anti-node. My standard deviation for my best powder node was 8.4, which is excellent, especially with the Barnes LRX. And it was 15.8 for my worst powder node, which also, I guess, isn't bad for a hunting bullet. So, but, in the end, my best node did have better SDs. The Hornady ballistician and engineer concluded that velocity gradually increases with charge weights, but that nodes don't really exist. I didn't calculate mean radius, which is what the Hornady guys mainly focus on, but I'd imagine that the mean radius would probably be very similar between both of these groups, in my opinion. You could see where it's kind of centered right there, and that has a lot to do with mean radius. If I was going by mean radius only, In my opinion, nodes may not really exist, but it sure seems like everything else is better in my node. And this doesn't mean that the Hornady guys are wrong. I just think it's a matter of perspective. In retrospect, though, I wish I shot these groups at 500 yards. I think I would have acquired better data from shooting at that distance. Another thing that the Hornady guys pointed out is the statistical insignificance of shooting 3, 5, or 10 shot groups. These are my 3-shot groups during this test. The anti-node looks like it's going to be horrible, and the best node group looks like a winner. And these are my groups at 5 shots during the test. The anti-node is actually at its final extreme spread within the first 5 shots. The best node group is well under a half MOA. And these are my 10-shot groups. The anti-node is actually tightening up in the center. My best node is still half MOA with 10 shots and looks like it's on its way to being an amazing 20-shot group. At 20 shots, the anti-node stayed consistent, but appears to have thrown another flyer. But more importantly, my best node group doubled in size between shot 10 and shot 20. Without a doubt, a 20-shot group is better grounded in reality than a 10-shot group is. I have a couple of close friends that shoot F-class, and they're very good at it. These guys are at a level way above me when it comes to both reloading and shooting. So I called them and asked them about this new nodeless load development theory that's out there right now. And both of them actually watched those Hornady videos, and they disagree with Hornady. One of the F-class guys I talked to was quick to point out that they do shoot 20-shot strings in F-class. So if 20-shot groups are statistically relevant, F-class shooters are already doing that. And they do see nodes in their load development and load adjustment processes. The other F-class shooter I talked to claims that the Hornady guys are putting way too much emphasis on mean radius. According to him, flyers are a real thing when you're not in a node, and he finds that being in a node reduces flyers. He stated that the problem with mean radius is that you can get a large enough sample to cancel out those flyers. He pointed out that group size wins competitions, not mean radius. But both of those F-class shooters actually agreed with the Hornady guys about people playing with their brass too much. But they disagree with the theory that nodes don't exist. And one of them actually said it sounds like something a PRS shooter would say. And that actually brings up a good point. Perhaps the new nodeless load development concept is fine for hunters and PRS shooters who just want a decent sub-MOA load for their rifle. But precision competition shooters really don't think like that. They win matches and shoot world records by finding nodes with their ammunition. And it's really hard to argue with results, with success, actually. F-class shooters tend to trust the target more than complex theories and math equations. To further complicate matters, I also trust Brian Litz, and his views on load development have been evolving through the years. If you read Volume 2 of Litz's book, then read the newer Volume 3, you'll see that he completely changed his outlook on load development. I think we might be in a period of transition when it comes to reloading theory. To start off my conclusion to this video, I want to go back to my 20-shot groups for a second. If I was shooting a target for a score in competition, this best node group right here is obviously better than the anti-node group. Like the F-class shooter told me, mean radius doesn't win competitions. And I think, You know, more of the shots in this anti-node would be outside the X-ring if I was shooting a competition. Also, the SD was lower on my node group right here, which should theoretically translate to better long-range performance. If I was shooting in a competition at this point, I think I would continue using my traditional load development processes. But if I just wanted a good sub-MOA hunting or maybe PRS load, I think nodeless load development has many merits here. You know, you can load ammo without wasting expensive reloading components and going through complex load development. You know, I cringe personally every time I burn through 60 rounds only to find out that my rifle doesn't like a particular powder or bullet. The nodeless reloading method cuts right to the chase in this regard, which is a good thing in my opinion. If you're making hunting ammunition or maybe PRS loads, try the new method. Just pick the velocity you want with the cartridge overall length that your rifle likes and shoot 20 round groups to see if your rifle likes the particular bullet, primer, and powder that you're using. This new nodeless load methodology indicates that only the bullet and powder type matters, and either your rifle likes them or it doesn't. You know, it demands that if a large sample group starts deviating from your expectations, it's time to stop right there and move on to another bullet or powder. I started reloading about 30 years ago, and this whole new concept contradicts much of my personal experience developing great loads over the years. But who knows? Maybe I've been chasing my tail and just getting lucky all these years. You know, it certainly doesn't feel that way, but it is possible. I'm definitely not one of those people that are stuck in their ways, and I'm always willing to change when somebody finds a better way to do things. You know, but admittedly, I'm still not convinced either way. Time will tell if this is just noise or nodeless load development is the real deal. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying Reloading Month. Thank you for watching, and as always, good hunting.